This is a canal that was built more than 2,200 years ago. It's in the middle of China. It channels the water from the Tibetan mountains onto the plain of Chengdu. What has this canal and a parking meter in downtown Chicago got in common? In one word, rent. The canal was constructed to channel water from the mountains of Tibet onto the plain of Chengdu to water the crops that irrigated the fields, that gave a sustenance to peasants through many generations. This canal is monumental. It was built before the time of Jesus, and it's a combination, a fusion of human labor and nature, the water from the mountains of Tibet. The combination of that human labor and the services of nature converge in a value which we now call economic rent. It's the surplus value after we deduct our wages and the use of capital in the productive, the value-adding enterprises that keep us all alive. We call it infrastructure, which adds value to the productivity of our labor. The secret to self-financing this piece of infrastructure is recycling the rents back into maintaining the canal, ensuring the banks prevent flooding of people's homes and fields, and maintaining the quality of the water so that it's drinkable and good for irrigating the farmers' fields. That fusion of nature and society creates that rental value, which is unique. It's distinct from the value of our wages and the returns of our capital. And if it was treated as a unique income, if it was reserved, respected, and allocated for the benefit of the whole community, then infrastructure like this thing is self-financing. It doesn't cost us anything to develop all the infrastructure we want. Highways, bridges, all the forms of infrastructure that a modern society needs to maintain a civilization. The problems arise when that rent is extracted from nature and society and exhausted, depleted, used for private purposes. That's when things go wrong. That's when societies start to draw on their accumulated capital, depleting their culture, and society starts to contract. The only reason why that happens is because the added value of infrastructure is abused. The rents are privatized instead of recycled back into the well-being of society and nature. To explain how they can go wrong, I'm going to Chicago to tell you the story about those parking meters, because they also represent a rent generated by nature and society, but the rents are now being privatized. thing that the canal and the parking space have in common is that they both generate a rent, a flow of value that is attributable to the convergence of two forces, the forces of nature. Here we have time and space, and if you want to park your car here, you monopolize time and space and exclude others from it, which means you're willing to pay for that privilege. And the resources of a community that make this location extremely valuable. The highway, the transit system, the people, commerce, all of these things like the art centre, police protection, these all give locations their value for which people are willing to pay. That generates a rent, and a parking space is a rent yielding asset, and this meter will measure the value of the location, and each motorist pays for the privilege of parking in this space. Now, when a community like Chicago charges rents for the use of these natural and social resources, it receives a substantial revenue, which is the best that any society could collect, because rents are not a damaging way to collect revenue to pay for the public services that make these locations so valuable. But Chicago has now fallen foul of the modern disease. The City Council has privatized these rent-generating spaces. 36,000 parking meters are now in the hands of a private corporation. Bankers from Wall Street and oil sheiks from the Middle East have bought the right to collect the rents from these meters for the next 70 years. They paid the city $1.2 billion nearly dollars for the privilege of that long lease. But they will recover that money and make a profit which I calculate will be at least 5 times what they paid. That means the residents of Chicago are losing a huge flow of rental income over the next 3 generations. This is an absurd, I would say, criminal situation. So how did it come about? Well, for one reason and one reason only. For 20 years, the residents of Chicago elected a mayor, Richard Daley, who kept promising not to raise the property tax.
And what we're asking for, again, is reasonable legislation in Springfield to pass property tax relief. Because property tax relief goes to every American homeowner. The dream of every American family is to own your own home.
The property tax is the closest we can get today to a way of raising revenue that doesn't damage the economy or society. But the residents of Chicago fell for the promise from Mayor Daley and kept re-electing him, and he held down the revenue that was generated by the property tax, which is why Chicago then fell into debt, deeper and deeper into debt, till one day the crisis struck and the way out was to sell the parking meters. There's little doubt about what's now going to happen. The people of Chicago will either have to face increasing taxes, the bad kind, or a reduction in the quality of their services, and they're already short of policemen, or the City Council will go deeper and deeper into debt over the next few years. There is no alternative. Chicago is not alone among city authorities in selling off public assets. Scholars are now drawing a comparison with what is happening today and what happened in ancient Rome. The Caesars started to sell off the public assets and the right to collect the tax revenue. They did so because they too had driven their society into debt, and to get some upfront money they privatized public assets. The result, we now know, is that corrupted the politics and the civic institutions of Rome, and ultimately led to the collapse of the Roman Empire. So what's the bottom line for this episode? Well, the corporation that bought the leases on these meters saw their revenue last year leap by nearly 30%. Over the last 20 years, while Mayor Daley was holding down the property tax, homeowners saw their land values, the land underneath their homes, leap in value. That's what happens when you hold down the property tax. But for the ordinary folk of Chicago and the businesses that are trying to create jobs and keep the economic vitality in the city, they took a hammering, and that's what's going to continue happening while the current tax regime continues.